In the year 1241, the Mongol army under the command of Subutai Khan, pursuing the remnants of the Kipchak tribes, penetrated deeper into the Altai Mountains than any army of the Great Khan had ever gone before. A detachment of 150 warriors, hardened by campaigns from China to Rus, disappeared without a trace in the gorges at the foot of Mount Baluka. 2 weeks later, only 17 men returned to the main forces, many of them wounded. Their commander, Temnik Batu Monke, reported an encounter with creatures that the local tribes called Almas, hairy wild men living in the most remote parts of the mountains. According to him, these creatures were neither beasts nor humans, taller than the tallest warriors, possessed of superhuman strength, and moved so fast that even experienced horsemen could not outrun them. Subutai ordered the survivors to write down everything they had seen, after which he forbade the troops from entering those gorges. The records were preserved in Mongolian chronicles, but most historians considered them to be exaggerations or myths until the early 20th century, when Soviet geologists made strange discoveries in the same places. Human bones with traces of monstrous injuries and Mongolian arrowheads stuck in crevices high up in the rocks, where a person could not climb without special equipment. If you are interested in stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are listening to us from. Batu Monke's detachment left the main camp at dawn on the 7th day of the month of the Ram. 150 horsemen divided into 5 arbanas of 30 men each. The warriors were experienced, having fought in Central Asia and Rus, and knew how to fight in the steppes, in the mountains, and in the forests. Each had 2 bows, a long one for long-range shooting and a short one for mounted combat. 2 quivers with 30 arrows each, a saber, a dagger, a leather jacket with iron plates, and a helmet made of hardened steel. The horses were short, stocky, hardy Mongolian steeds, capable of traveling 100 versts a day and feeding on fodder for weeks on end. The task was simple: to pursue the remnants of the Kipchak tribe, which had refused to submit to the authority of the Great Khan and had fled to the mountains. Scouts reported that the Kipchaks had taken refuge in one of the gorges at the foot of a high mountain, which the local Altai people called Uch Sumer, 3-headed. The Mongols knew this mountain by another name, Baluka, after the color of the eternal snow on its peaks. The first 2 days of the journey passed without incident. The detachment moved along the Katun River, which flowed rapidly through a deep canyon. The banks were steep and covered with dense forest, cedars, larches, firs, trunks 3 times thick. The air was clean and cold, smelling of pine needles and wet earth. Even during the day, the temperature did not rise above 10 degrees, and at night it dropped to almost 0. The warriors set up camp in open areas, built fires, and posted guards. On the 3rd day, the terrain changed. The forest became denser, the trees older, and the distance between the trunks smaller. The undergrowth had grown so thick that they had to dismount and lead their horses by the reins. The path narrowed to the width of a horse, with a rock wall rising on one side and a precipice on the other, at the bottom of which a river roared. Batu Monke, who commanded the detachment, was an experienced 42-year-old warrior. He had participated in the Western campaign under Subutai, witnessed the capture of Ryazan and Vladimir, and fought at Khalkha. He knew how mountains behaved, how the weather changed, where to set up ambushes, and how to avoid them. But here, on the approaches to Baluka, he felt a growing uneasiness that he could not explain. The first strange sign appeared at noon on the 3rd day. A scout riding half a verst ahead of the detachment returned and reported his discovery. A dead animal lay on the trail. The detachment rode up, dismounted, and examined it. It was a morale, a large male weighing at least 3 poods. The deer was lying on its side, its neck broken, but not in the way that predators such as wolves or bears break necks. Its head was twisted back almost 180 degrees so that its muzzle was facing its hindquarters. The bones of its neck protruded from the torn skin. The body was intact, with no signs of bites, claws, or blood. It was as if someone had grabbed the deer by the head and simply twisted it like twisting a stick to break it. The warriors looked at each other. One of the elders, named Timur, crouched down next to it and felt the carcass. He said that the meat was still warm, that death had come no more than an hour ago. He examined the ground around it. There were no deer hoof prints, as if it had been brought here and thrown down. But there were other tracks. Prints in the soft earth at the edge of the trail. Footprints, very large, almost an elbow long, a palm wide. 5 toes, like a human's, but wider and thicker. The heel was deeply imprinted in the ground, the toe less so, as if someone was walking carefully, stealthily. The distance between the footprints was about 2 yards, a step longer than that of a tall person. Timur said that these were the footprints of a bear walking on its hind legs. The others agreed. There were bears in these mountains, large and dangerous, but they usually did not attack people unless provoked. Batu Monke ordered them to leave the carcass and move on, but he told them to be on guard and keep their bows ready. By evening, the detachment had deepened into the gorge. The walls of the canyon rose almost vertically on both sides, more than 100 fathoms high. Above, snow-capped peaks were visible, painted red by the setting sun. Below, at the bottom of the gorge, it was already dark, cold, and damp. The air was heavy, with the smell of rotten wood and moss. They found a relatively wide spot where they could set up camp, a small clearing by a stream that flowed down from the cliff. The warriors dismounted and began to settle in. They lit 3 large fires, unsaddled their horses, and posted guards around the perimeter. They prepared a simple meal, cooking dried meat in cauldrons, eating barley flour flatbread, and drinking tea with salt and fat. Night fell quickly. The darkness in the gorge was almost complete, the stars invisible behind the high walls. Only the fires lit the camp, casting long shadows on the rocks. Around midnight, the guards reported hearing noises. Something could be heard moving in the forest beyond the light of the fires. The crackling of branches, the rustling of stones, as if something large and heavy was passing by. But no one appeared. Batu Monke ordered the guards to be reinforced, more men to be added, and additional fires to be lit around the perimeter. The warriors did not sleep, sitting by the fire, keeping their weapons close at hand. They listened. The sounds continued, sometimes approaching, sometimes receding, sometimes ceasing for long minutes, then resuming. The horses were restless, snorting, shifting their feet, pulling on the reins. Several horses tried to break free and had to be held back with difficulty. By dawn, the sounds had stopped. When it was light, they inspected the perimeter of the camp. They found tracks, the same large footprints. There were many tracks, as if several creatures had walked around the camp in a circle, stopped, stood for a long time, then moved on. Some of the tracks were 30 paces from the fires, very close. But what frightened the warriors even more were the marks on the tree. There were scratches on a thick cedar tree at the edge of the clearing, about 4 fathoms high. Deep grooves in the bark, as if from claws or nails. 4 parallel lines, each a palm's length long. The scratches were fresh, the light wood under the bark still oozing resin. It was as if something very large and strong had climbed the tree and left a mark. Timur said it was a bear. Bears climb trees and leave marks with their claws. But others objected. A bear would not climb 4 fathoms high without reason, and the tracks on the ground were not bear tracks. Batu Monke decided to continue. The Kipchaks were somewhere ahead, and the task had to be completed. The detachment moved further into the gorge. The day was cloudy. The clouds hung low over the mountains, and it began to drizzle. The path became slippery and rocky, and the climb became steeper. The horses walked slowly, with difficulty, often stumbling. The warriors led them by the reins, walking on foot, their clothes wet, everyone frozen. By noon, they reached a fork in the road. The gorge split in 2, with one trail going to the left and the other to the right. Both went uphill into the mountains and disappeared into the fog. Batu Monke sent scouts in both directions and ordered them to return in an hour to report on what lay ahead. The detachment stopped at the fork and waited. The soldiers sat on rocks, ate dry rations, and rested. The rain intensified, cold, almost icy. Visibility worsened, the fog thickened, An hour later, the scouts returned from the left trail. They said that the trail went uphill, steep but passable, and led to a plateau about 2 versts away. They saw no traces of the Kipchaks. The scouts from the right trail did not return. Another hour passed. Batu Monke became concerned and sent 4 more men to search for them. He ordered them to return in an hour, with or without results. The 4 returned on time. Their faces were pale. They reported that they had found the first scouts, or rather, what was left of them. 2 warriors lay on the trail about half a mile from the fork. One was dead, the other was dying. The dead one lay on his back, his chest caved in, his ribs sticking out of his body as if a cart had run over him. His insides were spilled out. His face was contorted with horror, his eyes wide open, his mouth agape in a scream. The second was still breathing, but barely. His chest was crushed, he was breathing with a rattle, and blood was coming from his mouth. He tried to say something, but his words were unintelligible. He died a few minutes after they found him. The scouts' horses were gone. Their weapons lay on the ground, bows broken, arrows scattered, sabers bent. It was as if someone very strong had taken the weapons and twisted and broken them with their bare hands. And again, there were tracks. The same large footprints, many tracks, disorderly, as if there had been a struggle. But there were few traces of blood, considering the nature of the wounds. It was as if the wounded had been dragged aside and then returned to the trail. Batu Monke was shocked. The loss of 2 warriors was serious. But even more serious was the nature of the killings. It was not an ambush by the Kipchaks, nor an attack by a wild animal. It was something else. He gathered the commanders of the Arbanovs and discussed the situation. Opinions were divided. Some said they should turn back and report to Subedi that there was a danger in these mountains that they could not assess. Others said they should continue, that the warriors of the Great Khan did not retreat before an unknown enemy, that this could be a ploy by the Kipchaks to intimidate them. Batu Monke decided to continue, but to change tactics. The detachment would take the left path, the one that had been tested and was safe. They would bypass the right gorge. They would move in a tight group, with no scouts ahead, all together. We climbed up the left trail. The ascent was steep and took the rest of the day. By evening, we reached the plateau, a wide, relatively flat space between the mountains, covered with low grass and sparse bushes. The altitude was about 1,000 fathoms above sea level. The air was thin, and it was difficult to breathe. On one side of the plateau rose the Beluga Massif, covered with snow and ice, its summit hidden in the clouds. On the other sides were lower mountains with wooded slopes. They set up camp on the plateau, in an open area so that no one could approach unnoticed. They built a large fire, posted guards around the perimeter, and doubled their number. The horses were kept in the center of the camp, tethered and guarded. The night was cold and windy. The temperature dropped below 0 and snow began to fall. The warriors wrapped themselves in sheepskin coats, sat by the fire, and did not sleep. Everyone was tense, waiting for an attack. The attack began around midnight. First, they heard a sound. A howl, long and loud, not at all like the howl of a wolf or the cry of an animal. The sound came from all sides at once, as if they were surrounded. Then they saw movement at the edge of the campfire's light. Figures. Tall, massive, moving on 2 legs. About 3 arshins tall, maybe more. Broad shoulders, long arms reaching almost to their knees. Their bodies were covered with long, dark hair hanging in shreds. Their heads were large and elongated, with prominent brow ridges. Their faces were flat, with broad noses and large mouths. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness, like wolves when light falls on them. There were many creatures. The warriors counted at least 20, maybe more. They stood in a circle, surrounding the camp, at a distance of about 50 paces. They did not approach, but simply stood and watched. Sometimes they moved from side to side, shifting from foot to foot. They made sounds, growls, wheezes, something like speech, but not human, guttural, low. Batu Monke ordered his men to shoot. The archers drew their bows and released their arrows. Some of the creatures were hit. The arrows stuck in their bodies, but there was almost no effect. The creatures twitched, pulled out the arrows, threw them to the ground, and continued to stand. Only one fell. Apparently the arrow had hit a vital spot, but the rest did not retreat. Instead, they began to advance. Slowly, step by step, but inexorably. The circle was closing in. The warriors continued to shoot, but they quickly ran out of arrows. Some creatures were pierced by dozens of arrows, but continued to advance. When the distance was reduced to 20 paces, the creatures accelerated. They ran. They ran on two legs, but as fast as galloping horses. They burst into the camp. The slaughter began. The creatures did not use weapons, only their hands, teeth, and claws. They grabbed warriors, broke them, tore them apart. One of them grabbed a warrior by the shoulders, lifted him above his head, and broke him in half like a dry branch. Another knocked 3 men down with a single blow of his hand, then trampled them with his feet. A third creature sank its teeth into a horse's neck, bit through its throat, and the horse collapsed, bleeding to death. The warriors fought desperately. They chopped with sabers, stabbed with spears, and cut with daggers. They managed to wound some of the creatures, and some retreated, but the rest continued. Sabers could cut off an arm or a leg and inflict deep wounds, but it was almost impossible to kill them. The creatures were incredibly resilient. Batu Monke shouted orders: retreat to the horses, mount up, break through. Some of the warriors managed to mount their horses, broke through the encirclement, and rode away. The rest were killed. Some were killed immediately. Others were so badly wounded that they could not move. They were left behind. 17 horsemen escaped the trap and galloped across the plateau into the darkness. They didn't care which way they went, just away from the camp, away from the creatures, away from the horror. The horses galloped, stumbled, and fell. 2 warriors fell with their horses, broke their legs, and remained where they were. The rest continued to ride. They were being pursued. Batu Monke looked back and saw the creatures running after them on 2 legs, running fast, almost as fast as the horses. They did not fall behind, did not approach, kept their distance, pursued them. The chase lasted several hours. They raced through the mountains all night, descended from the plateau, and found a path leading down. The horses were exhausted, foam on their lips, breathing hoarsely. 2 more fell behind. Their horses fell. The warriors tried to run on foot. The creatures caught up with them and killed them. Only at dawn did the pursuit end. The creatures stopped at the edge of the forest and did not go any further. They stood, looked back, then turned around and went back into the mountains. The 15 warriors who remained alive continued on. They did not stop until they saw the main camp, the yurts, the banners. Only then did they slow down, dismount, and fall to the ground from exhaustion. Batu Monke reported everything to Subade. He told him about the creatures in the mountains, how they killed, how they pursued them. Subade listened, his face stony, emotionless. He asked if Batu Monke was sure that these were not Kipchaks dressed in skins, trying to intimidate them. Batu Monke replied that he was sure. These were not people. They were something else. Subade ordered everything to be recorded, the losses documented, and the traces that some of the warriors remembered sketched. Then he ordered that no one enter that gorge again, that they bypass those mountains. He said that there are places in the world that do not belong to humans, where creatures live that are better not to encounter. Altai is one such place. The information was passed on to other commanders. Mongol troops moving westward bypassed those mountains. The Kipchaks who had taken refuge there were left alone. The loss of one tribe was nothing compared to the loss of entire detachments. Records of that expedition have been preserved in the Mongolian chronicles kept at the court of the Great Khan. Descriptions of the creatures, their behavior, and methods of killing. The chronicles called them Almas, wild people. It was said that they had lived in the mountains since ancient times, long before the arrival of the Mongols, that they avoided people, but if disturbed, they became fierce and dangerous. The local Altai tribes knew about the Almas. They had legends passed down from generation to generation. They said that they were the remnants of an ancient people who lived here thousands of years ago, before the flood, before the world changed. That they were once human but degenerated, became wild, went into the mountains, and became more beast than man. That they were very strong, very dangerous, and almost impossible to kill. That one should avoid the places where they lived, not enter certain gorges, and not climb certain mountains. The Evenks, who lived further north, called similar creatures Chuchuna. The Yakuts called them Mulin. Each people of Siberia had their own names for these creatures and their own stories about encounters with them. What all the stories had in common was that the creatures were large, strong, covered with fur, lived in remote places, avoided people, but could be deadly dangerous if disturbed. Batu Monke lived for another 20 years after that expedition. He took part in other campaigns, distinguished himself in battle, received the rank of 1,000-man commander, owned land, and had a family. But until the end of his life, he woke up at night in a cold sweat, seeing those red eyes in the darkness, hearing those inhuman sounds, feeling his comrades dying beside him. He told his sons about that expedition when they grew up and became warriors. He warned them that if they ever had to fight in the Altai Mountains, they should avoid the high peaks and deep gorges and not venture into places where there were no traces of human life. He said that the world was bigger and stranger than it seemed, that it contained creatures that people had forgotten or never knew about. Of the 15 warriors who returned from that expedition, most died in other battles over the next few years. Only 3 lived to old age. All 3, independently of each other, told the same story, about their encounter with the diamonds, about the massacre on the plateau, about the chase through the mountains. The details matched, which testified to the truthfulness of their stories. In the 20th century, when the Soviet Union began to actively develop Siberia, geologists, researchers, and mountaineers repeatedly reported strange finds in the Altai Mountains. In 1928, an expedition working in the Belukha region discovered a mass grave in one of the gorges. Human bones, many bones, several dozen skeletons. The bones were ancient, dating back to approximately the 13th century. Remains of weapons were found near some of the skeletons. Arrowheads, fragments of sabers, iron plates from armor. Mongolian weapons. But the condition of the bones was strange. Many had been broken during life, ribs smashed, spines shattered, skulls crushed. The nature of the fractures did not correspond to normal combat injuries. One skeleton had both thigh bones broken in several places, as if the legs had been struck repeatedly with a heavy object. Another skull was smashed with a single blow, the crack running from the crown to the base, splitting the bone in half. Such a blow could only have been delivered by a person of enormous strength or a heavy weapon, but there were no traces of weapons. The expedition photographed the findings, compiled a report, and sent it to Moscow. The report ended up in the archives and was classified for unclear reasons. Perhaps the authorities did not want rumors to spread that creatures unknown to science inhabited the Soviet mountains. In the 1930s, several groups of hunters reported encounters with strange creatures in the Belukha area. The descriptions were consistent: tall, hairy, moving on 2 legs, avoiding people. One hunter said he saw such a creature on the shore of a mountain lake early in the morning. The creature drank water, then noticed the man, let out a loud roar, and disappeared into the forest at incredible speed. In the 1950s, a group of climbers ascending Belukha discovered strange objects in a crevice in the rock at an altitude of about 3,000 meters. Animal bones, gnawed on and neatly stacked in a pile. Nearby lay stones that had clearly been used as tools. One was shaped like a hammer, another was sharp like a knife. The climbers decided that these were the remains of an ancient settlement of primitive people, although the altitude was unusual for such finds. In the 1970s and 1980s, interest in the snowman, Yeti, and Bigfoot was high in the USSR. Expeditions were organized to search for these creatures. Several expeditions worked in the Altai region near Belukha. The results were ambiguous. They found traces, large footprints in the snow and mud, similar to human footprints but larger. They found hair, long and coarse, which analysis showed did not belong to any known animal in the region. They found droppings, large, containing the remains of plant and animal food, but not identified as belonging to any known species. But no one caught the creature itself, took clear photographs of it, or killed it for study. Only rare, blurry photographs, controversial video recordings, and eyewitness accounts remain. Official science did not recognize the existence of Almasi, classifying reports of them as cryptozoology, a pseudoscience. However, the locals continued to believe. Altai elders told young people that there were places in the mountains where one should not go, that their ancestors knew this, avoided such places, and that the wisdom of their ancestors should be respected, that the world is full of mysteries, and not everything can be explained by science. In 2008, a group of tourists from Novosibirsk disappeared in the Altai Mountains. They searched for 3 weeks and found only 2 of them. The other 5 disappeared without a trace. The 2 who returned told a confusing story about being attacked by some creatures, about a chase, about how they barely escaped. Their story was considered to be the result of shock and hypothermia. The official version is that the group was caught in an avalanche. Most of them died, and 2 survived. But the rescuers who worked at the site said something else among themselves. They said they found strange tracks, that the tourists' tents had been torn from the inside out, that things were scattered as if people had run away in panic. They said that one of the backpacks was found in a tree, 4 meters high, as if it had been thrown there. That there were footprints in the snow that were unlike those of bears or humans. Another mystery of Altai, another story told around campfires, one that no one believes, one that cannot be verified. The 13th century Mongolian chronicles describing Batu Monke's expedition are kept in the archives of Ulaanbaatar. Access to them is restricted, and only a few scientists study them. Most historians consider the descriptions of diamonds to be mythological, symbolic, not literal. They say that the Mongols could have encountered wild people from some backward tribe, whom they mistook for monsters in their fear and confusion, or that it was an encounter with bears, which in the darkness and panic were mistaken for something else. But there are details that are difficult to explain. The description of the creature's height, their strength, and their behavior is too specific, too detailed to be a figment of the imagination. The number of witnesses is 15 warriors, all of whom gave identical testimony. The discoveries of the 20th century, bones, footprints, hair, coincide with the descriptions in the chronicles. Perhaps creatures unknown to science really do live in the Altai Mountains, relict hominids that have survived in isolated areas, avoiding contact with humans. Perhaps their population is small, they are on the verge of extinction, which is why encounters are so rare. Or maybe these are just legends, fears born of wild nature and human imagination. Mountains have always frightened people, always seem to be the habitat of monsters and spirits. Perhaps the Almas are simply a projection of ancient fears, an archetype of the wild man living in the subconscious. The truth is unknown. The Altai Mountains keep their secrets. The gorges at the foot of Belukha are still remote, inaccessible, and rarely visited. If something lives there, it continues to live, hide, and avoid people. And the descendants of those Mongol warriors who survived their encounter with the Almas still pass down stories from generation to generation. They warn the young that the world is bigger than it seems, that there are places and creatures in it that do not fit into our modern understanding of nature. There are boundaries that are better not to cross, secrets that are better not to reveal. Because some knowledge is dangerous, some encounters leave their mark, and some places, no matter how beautiful and attractive they may seem, are better left untouched, unexplored, forgotten. If you like the story, please like, subscribe, and write in the comments where you are listening to us from. See you in the next episode.